We're going to replace the brakes, which is on this case the driver's side. We got a new rotor and brake pads and hardware. To remove your tire, a 19mm socket, and these are studs, not actual lug nuts. That last one I'm going to just partially pull out, make sure my hands are free. And now we can grab the tire and pull it right off. So we're going to remove the anti-rattle clip first. Screwdriver or pry bar. There's 2 grooves it sits in. Just pull the pin part of it out like that and then follow it around. So this caliper is held on with 2 slider pins that are in these rubber boots. They have caps on them, so you're just going to take a little screwdriver, pop it off, or you can get it with your own fingers, and just set them aside because you're going to reuse those. Now the inside of there, that slider pin is a 7mm Allen head. We're going to break that caliper bolt free. And then the top one. And if you're looking up torque specs ever, this is what they call the slider or caliper pin to bracket. And then you have the caliper bracket to knuckle. So there are 2 different torques on those. Once it's unthreaded from the actual bracket, we'll just see if we can wiggle it out. Pull that slider all the way out because we're going to clean it up before we put it back together. And now we can take the caliper and wiggle it off. Use a pry bar if you need to. There we go. And there we have the caliper with the inner pad still on. Here's my caliper hook that I'm going to use. I'm just going to bring it up here real quick on the spring of the strut. And I'll take the pad out. There's the clips that lock it in. Now I'm going to get my tool that pushes that piston back. You can use a pair of like welder pliers, anything that you can get in there. I like to use the actual tool. It just goes smoother. And what you're looking for when you're doing this is the amount of pressure that it takes to put that piston back into the caliper. This is just a dust boot, but there's a seal right in here on this ridge line. And if this starts to leak brake fluid, the seal's blown, and then the piston will be no good. So we're just going to go back real slow. I got the tension on it. Now I'm going to break open my bleeder screw. This is where I don't want to reverse the fluid because I have an ABS module in this car. So I will open this bleeder screw. I have a catch bucket underneath. I'll try to aim it down this way. Oh, so that tells me, I bet you this bleeder screw is clogged quite a bit because that's pretty loose. Get my hand. There we go. So I'm going to clean this up. That is completely clogged. So let's first push this piston back. Normally I would leave that bleeder screw in, like I said, and just crack it a little bit and it would just come right out. But we just discovered the bleeder screw is completely clogged. So I'm going to bottom this out. I'm going to leave that bucket down there to catch any dripping. Get my hand. There we go. So I'm going to clean this up. That is completely clogged. All right, so here we have our bleeder screw. Now this isn't really common. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen when this rubber boot is not on there. And this was on there, but you could see how corroded it was. That's why it's so important to put another rubber boot of any sort on top of a bleeder screw, because road dirt gets jammed down in there. And here is where the bleeder screw works. There's a little pinhole on the edge. Look for an indent, and there's the indent right there. So I'm going to take a drill by hand, and I'm just going to bring it down as far as I can. Then I'm going to find that indent again, right there, and I'm going to just put a drill right in there and just start seeing if I can get that dirt and old metal right out. You do it by hand only because, you know, you are holding it unless you have a vise. All right, so what I ended up doing was got right through with a nice carbide bit. That goes all the way through. And then it cleaned it out this way, and you can kind of see the drill in there. So now we're ready to rock and roll with this. We're going to put it back together. All right, now our cleaned bleeder screw is ready to go. We're going to thread that back in and stop this from making a mess all over the place, dripping out. You can snug it with your hands, and then I just get my 10mm wrench and just give it a snug. So now we're just going to remove the outer pad, which is really easy. It just literally lifts and slides out. So see the style grooves? These are the kind of pads that go in this car. They just slide right in and sit in those grooves. There is no hardware on the bracket, but we will be cleaning this bracket up. So now we're going to remove the actual brake caliper bracket from the knuckle. There's 2 mounting bolts right here, and they're a 15mm socket. I'm just going to break it free. Get the top one. Now I'll use my electric tool to speed up that process. They do have a washer on them, so make sure you don't lose that. It's just the way the manufacturer does this one. Set these aside. Take the bracket out. And we're going to clean that up because that is quite dirty. So now we're going to remove our rotor from the hub, and you'll see this little pin on this particular car, and that is a 10mm socket deep. And you're just going to take it off. It holds the rotor in place because obviously there's no wheel studs. So hold on to the rotor, take that pin out. Let's see if it stays. There it goes. I'll show you what the pin looks like. Set it aside, and we'll just take that rotor right off. So now we want to clean the hub surface before we put the rotor back on and clean up this backing plate because it looks like a CV boot exploded at one point and we don't want that on our new brakes. So I'm just going to take some brake clean, start there, and then I have a wire brush and I'm just going to wire brush it after and go that route. But you want a flat, clean surface before you put your rotor on because you will get a pulsation easily. You don't want any rust messing up the surface of that. And don't take a grinder like a metal grinder because the actual depth of this hub does matter. So. Now you can see the high points. Someone's already cleaned this up at one point, so I'm kind of grateful. It's not that bad. So while that hub is drying, I'm going to take the actual caliper bracket and I'm going to clean up where those pads slide in and out because it doesn't come with tins. There's no hardware on this particular model. So you want to get rid of all this rust buildup. If you can't get it clean with a flat brush, then bring it to a wire wheel if you have one. That's always the fastest way to do it. You can take a flathead screwdriver and chip away at some of that metal, but don't hit and chip away at the steel. Just get rid of that surface rust. Because that actually will stop those pads from sliding in and out of this bracket. Now it comes to our caliper sliders, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take these to the wire brush. You can try to do it by hand. Sorry. Maybe you have some sandpaper at home, but you want these things shiny. You want to get all that debris off because caliper grease ends up getting hard after a while, and it can really stick to the steel and cause this not to slide freely in and out of that rubber boot, which is what the job is. So we want it to do its job. We want it to be nice and smooth. And there is the finished product. Nice and clean. I used a little brake clean to get the final coating off, and there we go. So before I put the new rotor on and after I've cleaned my hub surface, I always spray with a never cease of, I like to use copper because it's high pressure, high temperature. And now what I can do is turn the rotor this way, see if it will stay, and I can clean this with parts cleaner and get rid of any of the packaging oils that it comes with. Just want to get the packaging oil off. Then I'm going to spin it around and line up one of these bolt holes with the mounting hole. And don't forget that if you're using a high performance rotor that has the cooling drill slots, that's what we call this, drilled, you want the angle to be going into the wind, not with the wind. I'm going to take my mounting pin and just start it with my fingers, and then 10mm socket, and I'm going to torque that down. So I'm going to hold it flush to the surface, and I'm going to take away 10mm socket, snug that up. Now I can clean the front surface from the oils, the packaging, and let that dry. So now I'm going to take my cleaned caliper bracket, one I cleaned up, slide it back in. I'm going to put the top bolt on first, and always start it by hand. I don't want to cross thread anything. And then put the bottom bolt in. I'm going to snug those up with my electric 3/8 drive. My 15mm socket, I'm just going to snug these bolts up. Now I'm going to get my torque wrench and torque them to specs. And the torque specs to caliper bracket to knuckle for front brakes is 74 foot-pounds. That's a 15mm socket. Double check. I'm going to put the outer pad on, and you'll see how nice that sits in there now that's all cleaned up. No grease anywhere. You don't want to put any caliper grease on there. I don't like it. Grease only attracts dirt and sand, and then you're going to have a bind that will bind up and it won't flow freely. Now we can take our caliper off that hook. Get the caliper hook out of the way. And now I'm just going to take my inner pad and line up those 3 springs and push it right into place. There we go. See how it sits nice in there? I'm going to take some silicone paste or caliper grease. Once I put this, line this up here, I'm going to put some silicone slider grease right inside that boot. You can also put it on the actual slider pins, like this. Coat that, and then also coat the inside of the boot. Do it to both sides. I'm going to get one pin started. And that is a 7mm hex socket. So I'm going to just use my 3/8 ratchet to bottom this slider right out. Don't be afraid to wiggle the caliper to get it to start. And then I put my bottom pin already in, and I get my Sil Glide all over it, and I'm just gonna bottom them out because we are going to torque this to factory specs. So the torque specs on the caliper slider pins to bracket is 20 foot-pounds. And that is the 7mm Allen head. Don't forget to put the caps on. This keeps them clean and free of any debris as they go down the road. And the brakes come with this brand new anti-rattle spring, and the bottom bar goes underneath like that, and you're going to put this that way. So actually you can start the top in, bring it down like that. Then sometimes I take a pry bar or a screwdriver and just put it right in, tap it in. Make sure this is seated behind these little tab ears and that the flat part is on the ears that come out. Now we can tighten our axle bolt. That's 26 foot-pounds, and I can hold the actual rotor from spinning. So before you open the bleeder screw to do some gravity bleeding, I like to pump the brakes up to get those pistons seated. And then don't forget to check your master cylinder and top the fluid off. 10mm wrench will break that bleeder open. Now since we cleaned it and drilled it out, got the dirt out, it has a nice flow. Got a catch pan underneath. We're just going to let it gravity bleed, confirm there's no air in there. Being that I didn't do rear brakes at this time, I'm only opening and gravity bleeding the fronts. And then I found a rubber boot, and I'm just going to put it right over there so dirt doesn't get into it again, and I'll clean it with some parts cleaner. All right, so now we're going to put our wheel back on. Now when it comes to European cars, I always try to bring one of the studs and put it in my hands, because like the Volkswagens, Volvo, they have the stud lugs instead of, so you've got to hold it up in there. Make sure it's centered the best you can. Always start it by hand because that wouldn't be pretty. That's 19mm, so if you want to get a socket, you can pre-start it. So the wheel torque is 81 foot-pounds, and you're always going to want to torque in a star pattern. And then double check. When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.